All my life, my parents never cared to call me by my real name. To them, I was nothing but the dumb one. That label stuck to me before I could even read a single word. Meanwhile, my brother Logan was treated like royalty, as if he were born to wear a crown. He was the genius, the pride of the Harris family, the one who made it to Princeton on a full scholarship. On his graduation day, my father, Thomas Harris, stood tall before about 350 guests, bragging about the empire Logan was destined to inherit. He announced that Logan would take over Harris Holdings, the family's $100 million company, receive a brand new Lucid Air, and claim our $18 million mansion in San Diego. The room erupted in applause, as though it were a coronation. I sat at the back, invisible, humiliated, wondering how I could ever crawl out of the shadow they had forced me into. And then it happened. A man I had never seen before stepped forward. He leaned down, slid a thick white envelope into my hands, and whispered into my ear, "It's time to tell them who you really are." In that instant, everything I thought I knew about myself and everything my family believed was about to be shattered. I grew up in a house where love was handed out like trophies, and Logan was the only one who ever won. From the very beginning, my father made it clear who mattered. Logan was the prodigy, the golden son, the one meant to carry the Harris name into the future. I was the other child, the one who never fit into their rigid mold of perfection. At family dinners, I always sat at the far end of the mahogany table. My father took the head seat, Logan at his right, and my mother Susan glowing with pride every time Logan spoke. By the time I opened my mouth, the conversation had already moved on. I learned that silence was safer than the sting of their rolling eyes. My father had a way of cutting me down with only a handful of words. I still remember one night when I was 15. Logan had just announced he was accepted into an advanced science program, and the table burst with congratulations. My father lifted his glass and declared, "That is what it means to be a Harris. Excellence. Leadership. Brilliance." Then he turned to me with the faintest smirk. "And you, Caleb, you managed to pass gym class. I suppose we should be grateful for small victories." The room exploded in laughter. Even my mother joined in her laugh lighter, almost hesitant, as if she knew it was cruel but had long grown accustomed to playing along. The pain cut deeper than I could ever explain. It wasn't just the sting of the words, it was the weight of knowing they never believed I could be anything more. My mother, Susan, often whispered her comparisons when she thought no one else was listening. "Why can't you be more like your brother?" she would say, sliding a plate into my hands or passing me a pile of laundry. Her voice was calm, almost casual, but every remark sank inside me like a stone dropping into deep water. Logan thrived in this world. He played the role of the perfect son with effortless charm. Tall, sharp-featured, and confident, he carried himself like the world already belonged to him, and he loved reminding me that he was the chosen one. When I turned 17, I worked part-time at a local diner, just to save for the things I wanted. One evening, as I headed out for work, Logan smirked from the living room couch, surrounded by our parents' endless praise. "Don't forget to wipe the grease off your hands before you touch the door," he sneered. "We wouldn't want the neighbors to think the Harris family keeps a servant." My parents laughed as though it was witty banter while I walked out pretending it didn't matter. But every comment like that chipped away at me piece by piece. The only person who ever saw me differently was my grandfather, Walter Harris. He had built the family company decades earlier, turning nothing into the empire my father now controlled. Walter was softer, gentler, a man who valued people more than profits. Whenever I visited him, he never asked about grades or accolades. Instead, he asked about my thoughts, my dreams, and the things that made me happy. One afternoon, as we sat on his porch, he leaned closer and said, "Caleb, never mistake their blindness for truth. You carry something Logan does not. One day when the moment comes, you'll know it. Don't ever let them tell you otherwise." His words stayed with me, though I never truly understood them. To me, I was simply the forgotten son surviving in the shadows of a family that measured worth by trophies and headlines. At home, life felt like a competition I was never allowed to win. My father trained Logan like a soldier destined for greatness. By the time Logan was still a teenager, Thomas Harris had already brought him into board meetings, let him shadow business deals, and told every guest who visited that Logan was the future of the Harris legacy. I was never invited. Instead, I was told to mow the lawn, run errands, or stay out of sight as though my very presence was an inconvenience. It felt as though my very existence was an inconvenience, something to be managed rather than celebrated. The older we grew, the wider the gap between us became. Logan's acceptance to Princeton was treated like a national holiday in our household. That very evening, my mother Susan threw a lavish party complete with catered food and champagne. Strangers congratulated me, assuming I must be proud. But behind my polite smile, I felt invisible. It was as though I had no identity outside of being Logan's brother. By the time I turned 20, I realized I could no longer rely on my parents for love or validation. I worked multiple part-time jobs, saving quietly, building scraps of independence they never acknowledged. While Logan returned from summers abroad with stories of Asia, I spent mine stacking boxes in warehouses and washing dishes. My parents dismissed my work as wasted time, never realizing it gave me a strength they could not imagine. Still, the weight of their judgment pressed on me every time we gathered as a family. My father's words echoed in my head. "Caleb, you will never amount to anything." My mother's sighs followed me down the hallways. Logan's laughter reminded me how effortless his life seemed compared to mine. By the time his graduation approached, I had already braced myself for the humiliation I knew was coming. It was never a question of if they would favor him again, but only how public and how painful they would make it. I prepared myself to sit in silence, to swallow my pride while they celebrated Logan as the crown jewel of the Harris family. What I did not know was that the life they had forced me to accept, the one filled with shadows and shame, was about to collide with a truth that would shake my entire family. I had no idea that the envelope waiting for me that day would prove my grandfather's words right, and that my silence would not last forever. The day of Logan's graduation was a performance from the moment I opened my eyes. My parents treated it as if it were more important than any holiday or milestone we had ever known. My mother Susan rushed through the house barking orders to the staff about floral arrangements, catering deliveries, and the guest list. My father, Thomas Harris, stood in the foyer adjusting his cufflinks, already rehearsing the speech he would deliver to about 350 guests. I had no role in this day except to sit quietly. My suit was one of Logan's old ones, barely tailored to fit, and my seat at the ceremony had been placed far back among the rows, far from where the family of honor sat. I watched from a distance as Logan walked across the stage, his gown flowing behind him, his name announced to roaring applause that shook the hall. My parents leapt to their feet, clapping with a pride so fierce it made my father's chest swell as if he were the one being honored. I clapped too, though every movement felt heavy, my stomach knotted tight. After the ceremony ended, the real spectacle began. Our family hosted a reception in a grand San Diego ballroom, lit by towering chandeliers and polished wood floors that reflected the golden light as if the whole room had been gilded. Valets lined the entrance, guiding luxury cars as they pulled up in an endless stream. Guests from the business world, politicians, and family friends filed inside dressed in tuxedos and gowns. They had not come merely to celebrate Logan's graduation. They had gathered to witness the official announcement of his inheritance. I did my best to remain invisible, pressed against the back wall, half hidden behind enormous vases filled with white lilies. My presence felt like nothing more than an afterthought, a courtesy extended out of obligation. People brushed past me, barely nodding. Some whispered, "That must be the other son," as if I were nothing but a footnote in the story they came to see unfold. Then came the moment I had dreaded. My father, Thomas Harris, climbed onto the stage with a microphone, his voice booming across the cavernous room. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us tonight to honor my brilliant son, Logan Harris. The crowd erupted in another wave of applause. Logan, standing proudly near the front, grinned with the kind of confidence that had been fed to him his entire life. Thomas pressed on, his words swelling with grandeur. As many of you know, the Harris family has built more than a company, we have built a legacy. Tonight, I am proud to announce that Logan will inherit the foundation of everything we created, the family company valued at $100 million, the brand new Lucid Air parked outside, and our $18 million mansion in San Diego. The crowd cheered wildly once again. Glasses clinked, laughter and applause, thundered celebration pressing down on me from all sides. I stayed in my chair at the back, my heart sinking lower with every roar of approval. My mother, Susan, leaned into my father's side, her face glowing with satisfaction, her hand resting on his arm as if to say, "We did it. Our perfect son has everything." For a brief moment, my eyes locked with Logan's. He lifted his champagne glass toward me, but not to welcome me. His smirk was sharp mocking, as though he were toasting my failure. The message was clear. I had lost. He had won. I wanted to vanish, to disappear from a room where I was nothing more than a shadow. The humiliation pressed down on me heavier than ever. I thought of the years I had worked unnoticed, the nights I spent alone, hoping maybe that one day they would see me differently. But after my father's words, that small hope shattered in front of everyone. As the crowd cheered for Logan, Susan passed by on her way to the stage. She stopped just long enough to whisper in a voice that cut clean, "At least don't ruin this day for your brother. Keep to yourself." Then she moved on, smiling as she reached for Logan's hand. Speeches carried on. Toasts rose louder and louder, and I remained rooted to my seat. I clenched my fists beneath the table, forcing myself to breathe. Rage and sorrow swirled in my chest like a storm I could not reveal. I thought of my grandfather, Walter Harris, the only person who ever treated me as though I mattered. His words echoed in my mind. "One day the truth will set you free." But how could that be true when everything around me declared otherwise? My parents had made their choice. They had crowned Logan their heir. I was left to carry the title of the forgotten son. The shame sat in the shadows while the rest of the family basked in golden light. The division that had shaped my whole life was clearer than ever. I wasn't simply left out. I was erased. My father had announced it to the world, and the applause felt like nails being driven into a coffin. In that moment, I told myself I would remain silent, that I would endure this night, as I had endured every insult, every whispered joke, every cruel laugh. I had no idea what the night held next. When the applause finally began to thin and the music rose again, something shifted in the room. That was when I saw him, a man in a dark suit moving with a purpose that ignored the noise and the laughter around him. He wasn't clapping. He didn't smile. He carried something folded in his hand, and his eyes never left me. He moved through the crowd with a determination, weaving past clusters of guests, as if the party had no hold on him. His stare locked onto me steady, and the air seemed to change before he reached my table. He stopped right then. He was tall, his features sharp, his expression unreadable. He bent slightly, placed a thick white envelope onto the wood by my plate, and leaned close enough that his breath ghosted my ear. His voice was low, deliberate. "It's time to tell them who you really are," he whispered. Before I could move, he straightened his jacket, gave the smallest nod, and vanished into the crowd as swiftly as he'd appeared. I sat frozen, staring at the thick white envelope against the polished wood. My fingers trembled as they hovered over it. For years I had been dismissed, mocked and silenced. No one had ever suggested there was anything more to me than the role my family had written. I slid the envelope onto my lap and hugged it there, shielding it from sight. My heart hammered so loudly I thought it might break through my ribs. I almost stood and left, then slipping out unnoticed, but the man's words kept looping in my mind. Who you really are. What did that mean? The speeches continued. Logan now stood beside Thomas Harris, smiling as guests offered their congratulations. Their voices blurred into a distant hum as my focus narrowed to the sealed flap. I eased a fingertip beneath it and paused. A small voice inside warned me this could be a cruel joke, another public humiliation, but another voice, Walter's voice, nudged me forward. I tore the seal and unfolded the contents. Inside were several official-looking documents clipped together and a folded handwritten letter. The papers bore stamps and signatures that made my breath hitch. My eyes darted across the first page and then stopped cold when I saw my name printed clearly not as a footnote or mockery, but in legal terms. The shares of Harris Holdings, the trust that controlled the $18 million mansion in San Diego and accounts I'd never been told about, were all listed under Caleb Harris. The last page was a transfer of authority signed years earlier by my grandfather Walter himself. My hands shook as I smoothed the paper. I unfolded the letter. His handwriting was steady and unmistakable. Caleb, if you are reading this, it means the time has come. I watched both of you grow, and I understood early on that the future of this family must not rest on arrogance or vanity. I chose you because you understand humility. You know what it means to endure without recognition, and you see people for who they are, not for what they bring. Do not doubt yourself. Everything I built belongs to you. I read the words until they blurred. My grandfather had chosen me. Not Logan, not Thomas, not the glossy version of perfection my parents worshipped. For so long I had let their cruelty define me. Now here was the proof that the man who built our legacy had seen something in me they never did. My chest constricted with a wild mix of disbelief and a fierce, unfamiliar defiance. Part of me wanted to leap to my feet, rip the papers into the air, and shout the truth until the chandeliers rattled. But fear wrapped around my throat. Thomas stood at the podium, oblivious to the shift at my table. The room still hummed with celebration. For a heartbeat I was both terrified and electrified, terrified of what would follow if I revealed this, electrified by the freedom those pages promised. My father stood tall at the front of the ballroom, his voice heavy with authority, his reputation glowing brighter than the chandeliers glittering above. If I interrupted him now, if I dared to challenge his grand announcement, the backlash could crush me. The Harris name meant power, and Thomas Harris had spent his life protecting it with intimidation, control, and fear. But then every memory that had brought me to this night came flooding back, his smirk when he called me useless. Susan's whispers reminding me that I was nothing compared to Logan. My brother's cruel jokes disguised as wit. The endless silence I had endured waiting for a scrap of approval. For too long I had let them decide who I was. The envelope in my jacket was no longer just paper. It was freedom. I closed the folder and pressed it firmly to my chest. The decision crystallized sharp and undeniable. I would not stay silent. Not this time. I would not let my father's voice drown out mine again. The music softened. Another toast began. Glasses lifted for Logan. Cheers echoed, laughter rolled across the room. And I rose slowly, deliberately. My legs trembled, but my resolve was iron. For the first time in my life, I felt taller than the weight of their judgment pressing down on me. As I stepped forward, heads turned. Whispers followed. Thomas noticed me and frowned, his irritation plain. Logan smirked, assuming I had come to congratulate him, to play my role as the obedient shadow. Susan shook her head slightly, her warning as sharp as glass. But my grandfather's words thundered in my mind. One day, the truth will set you free. This was that day. I climbed the steps, my pulse racing, my fists clenched tight at my sides. Thomas leaned toward the microphone, his smile stiff false. Caleb, this is not your moment, he muttered under his breath. But I did not move. My voice, trembling at first, grew stronger with each word. Actually, Father, this moment belongs to me. The room froze. Guests halted mid-toast, glasses suspended in mid-air. Silence spread through the hall like a wave crashing over stone. Logan's grin faltered. Thomas' eyes narrowed with fury. I reached inside my jacket, gripping the envelope that carried the truth my family had buried. At the edge of the stage, with about 350 eyes locked on me, the silence pressed heavier than any sound I had ever known. My father's jaw tightened as he stepped closer, his voice low but razor sharp. "Caleb, step down. You're embarrassing yourself." For years I had obeyed orders like that without a whisper of resistance. For years I had shrunk into the shadows whenever told I didn't belong. But not this time. My hand trembled as I pulled the documents from my jacket and lifted them high enough for all to see. "I'm not the one embarrassing myself," I said, my voice carrying farther than I believed possible. "You are." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Logan let out a shaky laugh, raising his glass as if to mock me. "What are you doing? Sit down before you make a fool of yourself." I opened the envelope and unfolded the papers, the seal of Harris Holdings glimmering under the ballroom lights. "These are signed transfer agreements from Walter Harris," I announced, my voice steady now. "He chose me, not you, Logan. He chose me, not you, Father. The company, the San Diego mansion, the accounts, everything was placed in my name years ago." The ballroom erupted into a storm of whispers and stunned silence. Some guests leaned forward to glimpse the papers while others exchanged uneasy glances, unsure what to believe. Thomas Harris lunged toward me, his face flushed crimson with rage. "This is absurd. That old man must have been confused. He didn't know what he was doing when he signed those." His hand reached out to snatch the papers, but before he could, a firm, unwavering voice cut through the chaos. I knew exactly what I was doing. The crowd turned as my grandfather, Walter Harris, slowly rose from his chair near the front. His cane tapped against the polished floor with each deliberate step. Though age had bent his frame, his presence commanded more authority than anyone in the room. When he reached me, he placed a steady hand on my shoulder. I entrusted these papers to a man I could rely on, and I told him to deliver them when the time was right. That time is now. He turned his gaze across the crowd. "I chose Caleb because I watched both of my grandsons grow. Logan, you have brilliance, but brilliance without humility turns to arrogance. Thomas, you built wealth, but you lost compassion. Caleb has endured neglect and cruelty, yet he has not hardened his heart. He will lead because he knows the value of every person, not just the powerful." The ballroom erupted again this time, with louder gasps and murmurs. Logan's face drained pale, the smirk wiped away. "Grandfather, you can't be serious," he stammered. "I've done everything to make you proud. I've achieved more than Caleb ever could." Walter looked at him not with anger, but with sorrow. "You achieved for yourself, Logan, not for others. That is not leadership. That is vanity. That is not leadership. That is vanity." Thomas turned on his father, his voice cracking with desperation. "You would give everything to the boy who failed, to the one who never lived up to the Harris name." Walter's reply cut through him like steel. "I am giving everything to the man who will redefine what the Harris name means." The crowd fell silent, as if the chandeliers themselves trembled under the weight of his words. For the first time in my life, I felt the power of being seen. Truly seen. Not as a disappointment, not as a shadow, but as the rightful heir to something greater than wealth. I turned toward the audience, my hands no longer shaking. All my life I had been told I was nothing worthless, doomed never to measure up. Tonight, you heard my father declare it again. But you also see the truth in my hands. My grandfather believed in me when no one else dared to. I will not waste what he entrusted me with. I will honor this family's legacy in a way that builds people, not just profits. Applause began hesitantly, like uncertain raindrops, then swelled louder, stronger, until it washed over the hall, drowning out the silence that had suffocated me for years. Thomas' face burned red with fury, but he had no words left. Susan's lips trembled, her perfect smile shattered. Logan stood frozen, his glass still raised as if time itself had abandoned him. And at the back of the ballroom, the stranger who had delivered the envelope reappeared, his eyes steady, his expression unreadable. He gave me a single nod, then disappeared again like a shadow retreating into the night. Whoever he was, he had been the bridge between my grandfather's promise and this moment of truth. A rush of clarity surged through me. This was never just about inheritance. It was about breaking free from the chains my family had wrapped around me since childhood. The humiliation, the cruelty, the endless silence, all of it had led to this night where I finally stood unashamed. I turned to Walter and bowed my head slightly. "Thank you for believing in me." He squeezed my shoulder. "Now show them why I was right." When I faced the crowd again, I no longer saw strangers staring at the family failure. I saw witnesses to my transformation. I saw the end of the story they had written about me and the beginning of the one I would write for myself. For the first time, Logan lowered his eyes, unable to meet mine. His smirk was gone, replaced by something he had never shown me before: fear. And in that ballroom beneath the glittering chandeliers, I realized the truth. I had never been the dumb one. I had only been waiting for the right moment to reveal who I truly was. The applause faded into uneasy murmurs as the weight of what had just happened settled over the ballroom. My father's hands clenched at his sides, his voice low, bitter and sharp. "This is not the end. You have no idea what you're stepping into, Caleb." He turned abruptly and stormed out, his polished shoes striking the floor like gunshots echoing through the hall. My mother followed quickly, her eyes avoiding mine, her face pale beneath the layers of carefully applied makeup. She had spent her entire life building the illusion of a perfect family, and in one night it had crumbled in front of everyone she longed to impress. Logan remained rooted where he stood, shoulders stiff, fists trembling around the fragile stem of his glass. He glared at me with a mix of disbelief and fury, as if I had stolen something he believed was already his by birthright. "You don't deserve this," he hissed through clenched teeth. "You're nothing compared to me." I met his eyes without flinching. For the first time, I did not shrink beneath his words. "Maybe I'm not what you think I should be," I said, my voice steady, "but I am what grandfather believes I can be. And that is more than enough." The look on his face revealed the truth he refused to admit. He was afraid because the foundation of his superiority had finally collapsed. Walter straightened beside me, taller than I had seen him in years. Though he leaned on his cane, his voice carried the strength of iron. "This family changes starting tonight. The company is in good hands, and for once those hands belong to someone who knows the cost of being overlooked. Caleb. The burden is yours now, but it is also your gift." His words sank into me with a weight both terrifying and liberating. I knew the road ahead would not be easy. Leading a company worth $100 million was more responsibility than I had ever imagined. But for the first time, I believed I could rise to the challenge. Not because I longed to humiliate my brother or prove my father wrong, but because I wanted to honor the faith my grandfather had placed in me. The guests began to applaud once more, slowly at first, then stronger this time, not for Logan or Thomas, but for me. The sound filled the hall like a tide washing away years of silence. My chest lifted as I stood taller, no longer hiding in the shadows of my family. Later that night, when the crowd had thinned and the chandeliers dimmed, I stepped outside into the cool San Diego air. The city lights stretched across the skyline, glowing against the dark. For years I had looked at those lights as symbols of a world that belonged to everyone but me. Now they felt different. They no longer mocked me. They glowed like a promise, a reminder of something I had finally earned. I thought of the boy I once was sitting at the far end of the table, mocked and dismissed, invisible in my own home. I thought of the countless nights I lay awake, convinced their words were true, believing I truly was nothing. And then I thought of the man I was becoming, standing here with the truth in my hands, free at last from the cage my family had built around me. The lesson was clear. Being underestimated does not define your worth. Sometimes the cruelest judgments prepare you to lead with a strength no one expects. The labels others stamp on you do not determine your future. What matters is the truth you carry inside and the courage to reveal it when the moment finally comes. Walter joined me outside, resting his weathered hand on my shoulder. "You see now, don't you?" he asked softly. "Yes," I replied, my voice steady. "I see it clearly." He smiled, his eyes reflecting the glowing skyline of San Diego. "Then carry it well. The future is yours." I breathed deeply, letting the night air fill my lungs. The fear, the shame, the years of being invisible, they no longer had power over me. I was not the dumb one. I was the heir chosen not for perfection, but for resilience, for heart, for strength forged in silence. And to those of you listening to my story, I have something to say. If you have ever been called less, if you have ever been mocked, dismissed, or pushed aside, remember this moment. Your worth is not defined by the voices that try to bury you. Your time will come, and when it does, the truth you carry will thunder louder than every insult ever thrown at you. Thank you for listening to my story. If it moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Leave a comment below and tell me what part resonated most with you. And if you want to hear more stories like this, don't forget to subscribe to the channel.